Welcome to the Glass House. Today on the show, we have Nicole Zasowski, who you've heard before because we had her on an episode about her book, What If It's Wonderful?
Mm-hmm.
I love Nicole.
We've had her on here twice before. We like having her on here because she communicates so uniquely, but also in a really sweet spirit. Her tone is really sweet. She's very gracious. She's very joyful. I mean, that's part of that book. So we wanted to have her back on here again.
She's so articulate and likable. And I like the way she communicates. Yeah. This is going to feel a little different, though. Normally, when we have the conversation, this person is either in the studio or on Zoom and we're recording it. But I asked her to come and speak to our top 50 leaders at a retreat. We took equipment, we recorded it. So we've edited some of that down. We're going to play some of it for you today. And then Lindley and I are going to kind of break it down.
Yeah, we add some commentary.
Yeah. So if it feels a little different, it's because it is. So we're going to jump right in, and I hope you enjoy Nicole.
All right. So tonight we are going to talk a little bit about our stories and how our stories shape the way we react to pain. Which I thought, we were just having this conversation. There's this thing called a pain cycle. And what we experience as pain early in our lives often becomes kind of the default mode. So all of us in this room have experienced pain. How would you describe that cycle or what happens in a person's life?
So when we think about our stories, pain comes from two different directions. When we experience a violation of love, it informs how we feel about our identity. And examples would be worthless or inadequate or unloved. All of those speak to my identity as a person. When we experience a violation of safety, it informs or trust, it informs whether or not we feel safe. So some feelings in that category might be powerless, unable to measure up to expectations, something having to do with your security in the relationship, vulnerable. And so when we think about our stories, we were given messages about who we were and whether or not we were safe. And this is true for even those of us that had great childhoods, that none of us get through life completely unscathed, and whether it was circumstances or a relationship or a watershed moment that you can really think of the actual story where you took that message on. We all have about 3 to 5 feelings that every time we experience pain as adults, that is where our brain goes. You talked about neural pathways, that's the feeling that gets hit. So we could all, I think I said this morning, we could all go through the exact same pain, the exact same situation, and experience it completely differently because of the wounds that we're bringing to that. And so in turn, we learned to protect ourselves. There were things we needed to do to survive that feeling. And there's 4 main categories of ways that we survive, and there's lots of specifics in each of these buckets, but the 4 main ways that we tend to react to pain are blame, shame, control, and escape. And again, with that neural pathway, when that feeling gets hit, whether it's inadequate, whether it's powerless, whether it's vulnerable, unsafe, your brain has a neural pathway that goes straight to that protective behavior. That's totally understandable, but not very helpful as we grow into adulthood and start taking responsibility for our own pain and relationships.
Let's walk through each of those, because I think it's probably a helpful exercise for us to think, which one am I?
Yeah.
So in a situation where someone feels threatened, blame immediately becomes somebody did this to me?
So blame can look lots of different ways. It can literally be blaming somebody else. It can look like rage, anger, even withdrawing to punish. So like the silent treatment, it would be a very quiet form of blaming, but the intent is to punish the other person. Yeah, those would be some examples.
Wow. That's really good. Shame would be?
So we often talk about shame as a feeling, but in restoration therapy, the model that I practice, we consider it as more of a way of speaking to yourself. It's a posture towards yourself. So you might feel ashamed or inadequate or worthless, but you also, shame would be entering into agreement and speaking shaming words that you would never say to somebody else out loud, to yourself in your own heart. So I call Eeyore the poster child of shame. It's, if you ever try to affirm a shamer, and I am one, so I can speak with authority on this. If you ever try to affirm a shamer, often it's like a black hole. They'll find a way to deflect that compliment, or they'll find a way that, yeah, but I really should have done this, or they can be very... it can be crazy making because I want you to keep affirming me. I don't want to take responsibility for affirming myself, but I'm going to block it anyway. Yeah. So.
And control?
Control's a tough one because our culture celebrates so many of these behaviors, but often if they're rooted in pain, it would be considered a coping reaction. So perfectionism, performance, obviously micromanaging other people, withdrawing to manipulate. Withdrawing can actually be in each of the 4 categories. It's just the intent is different. So manipulating somebody, becoming invulnerable, like I am not going to be vulnerable. I'm going to stay very controlled of myself.
Okay, and what was the last one?
Escape. And escape also can have a lot of different faces, and some of them are socially acceptable behaviors. So the ways that we can escape have different consequences, but they are all equally emotionally destructive. So you can escape with Netflix or drugging and drinking, and obviously the consequences are not the same, but if you're doing it to emotionally check out, it's also emotionally destructive.
So, like, describe a marriage counseling situation you've been in, without naming names, where these two can't seem to sync up because they both have their own coping. I'm sure, and they're not even aware that when they get into a heated argument, they each have a default mode.
Yeah. And so I draw this in a circle with a couple. So one person's feelings are here, goes to their reactions, hits right into the other person's pain. Their reactions hits right into this person's pain. It's hard to do without a piece of paper.
No, I see what you're saying.
You can picture it. And I've never drawn one that doesn't perfectly hit, where one person's coping doesn't perfectly hit somebody else's pain. But what I say is that when I walked down the aisle toward my husband on our wedding day, he might trigger my pain. He might touch it with something he does, but he did not create that pain. And my pain is not my fault, but it is my responsibility.
There's so much there to unpack. I loved what she said about how 20 people can go through the same wounding experience and have a completely different takeaway that we all bring to every situation, the stuff we have in us from before. So I have felt this way at times of like a sense of like, what's wrong with me when I go through something that I feel like is really hard. Like, holy cow, that just knocked me over. And then a colleague goes through a similar thing and he and I are talking about it. And it's like, he just kind of talks about it in passing. Like for example, there's some pieces of public criticism that I've received in this role that are just like, I'm talking about, put me on the floor. And then I talk to other people who endured almost the exact same thing. And they're like, yeah, isn't that crazy how people say stuff? And like, what's wrong with me that I'm taking this so sensitively? Like, I think all of us have those sensitive spots that if somebody touches that, a lion's coming out of me. Can you think of anything for you? Like that if somebody touches that button, like in ministry or whatnot, that you're like, ooh, you don't want to go there.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this so many times on here. A natural insecurity for me is in the area of intellect. And so in the area of my job where I feel like I've pretty much got it nailed down. Like I feel like I've got this down. I'm doing it right. When someone says, "Hey, have you thought about doing it this way?" It's such a natural question, and I should be so receptive to that because everybody can improve. But yeah, I mean, how many times have I come to you and said, "Can you believe they asked me to do it this way? Like I'm doing it right. Like I'm doing it the way I'm supposed to be doing it." And so, yeah, it just touches something in me of like some sort of shame that I bet they think I'm stupid. They think that I don't know how to do this, and they're telling me how to do my job when they're really just saying.
There's this whole inner narrative you tell yourself.
And it's
they're
like,
finally going to find out that I really am dumb.
Thank you. Don't say that.
But I think that's what's going through your head.
Okay, but
Because I've talked to you about this.
You just shamed me.
No.
Do you think I'm dumb?
I didn't shame
I'm
you.
kidding.
I'm saying that that inner voice is not telling you the truth.
I know, yes.
So we had this experience early on in our marriage. I was a college minister. You married into this ministry thing. You didn't know you were going to be forced to do this. We go to a setting where there's a bunch of really smart college girls who have studied the Bible their whole lives, and they put you on the spot. For those who don't remember the story.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hey, good to meet you, Lindley. How many points of Calvinism do you ascribe to? How many parts of the tulip? I'll never forget that day as a day that you spent a day like in the gutter of what am I doing? I shouldn't be married to somebody in ministry. This isn't for me.
I honestly, I was 21 years old and didn't know what that term was. I had never heard it before.
So you felt stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I just was like, okay, these girls are younger than me. I guess I was 22 because I had just graduated college. But, in dental hygiene programs, we don't learn a lot about Calvinism. So I just had never been a part of my language.
What Nicole is saying resonated with me, but it puts us into these 4 categories. When we feel exposed or we feel like we've been humiliated, we either want to blame somebody, we want to live in shame, we want to, try to assert control, or we try to escape. The one I want to speak to is blame. It's amazing to me in all my years of leadership how often I see people doing everything they possibly can, but just admit they screwed up. Like how endearing it is when someone comes to me and says, I have to tell on myself, I made a terrible decision. This has really come back to be a bad thing. I thought it would be great. I owe you an apology. And like at that moment, everything's fine, everything's clear. But they will do everything in their power to say, they didn't broadcast it right. They didn't, we didn't have the right audio or whatever.
People just haven't come back from COVID.
That's right. That's the new one for pastors.
Yes, they just didn't come back from COVID. I'm like, okay, come on.
If the church is still kind of empty, man, we're still stuck in COVID.
Yeah, we just can't recover. I'm like, well, you may have to look a little harder.
Yeah, or could it be people just found a better church? And they don't want to tell you that.
That was harsh.
It's true.
A different church, not a better.
Well, it's better for their needs.
Well, it's different.
People vote with their feet, Lindley, and their dollars. Don't you remember this in church ministry? Anyway, I do think blame is a major problem for ministry leaders. I've done it. You've done it. We've all done it. But Nicole is right. That's a major problem.
I think I agree with that. And if we're not trying to use us, because we kind of talk about our issues, people know that control is a mind. I think escape. I think a lot of people escape. You talked about that story one time. I'm going to butcher it. Chime in about how that. Who did we interview? Paul Tripp, and he said if the young pastors don't stay to learn their mistakes, how will they mature? How will they grow in wisdom?
Yeah.
I think that right now it's so easy to escape. There's every church now is looking for somebody. And so if you have a hard situation, if you have a church member that is just giving you grief, it's like, what? I don't have to take this. I'm going to escape and I'm going to go to the next church and I'm going to have the exact same person in that church. I mean, there's going to be one in every church. And so I think escapism is a really easy card to pull right now.
I recently sent an email to all of our young leaders. One of the things I said, hey, young leader, here are some things I have seen now prevalent in our younger, talented people. One is they jump ship when it gets really hard. It's okay to switch organizations or feel like you're called to something else, but when you're in the middle of a really intense season and you just bail, that sends all the messages of that you just really didn't want the stress and you're going to go somewhere where it's easier. And guess what? Once you get there, it's stressful.
There's people.
So how many times are you going to keep moving around when the going gets tough? So I think...
I mean, there are reasons to escape sometimes.
Right, and
so
I just
everybody
said,
understands that.
There's good reasons, but if you can possibly help it, leave when things are going well. Don't leave when everything's in the gutter and people feel like you just jumped ship while it was sinking.
Yep.
So anyway, I thought that was a really good conversation. Let's set up the next clip. In this next clip, somebody asked the question at this leadership retreat where Nicole was speaking. Someone said, do we all only struggle with one of these things, these 4 things, or can you have issues with multiple of these things? I like what she has to say. Listen.
Yeah, so you can cope with 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those things. I would say 4 is rare. Most people have about 2. That they really lean on 90% of the time. And it might be 2 different control behaviors and 1 blame behavior, or shame and escape are often good friends. Those 2 are often paired together because the shameful feelings are so, or the feelings that result from that shame are so painful that you just go into this numbing escape. But when you come out of that escape, it's just hit pause on your emotional processing. And so then the person experiences shame around that and they swing back and forth. So yeah, most people have at least 2 of those. So all of them are equally relationally destructive. Again, they have different consequences. So blamers get a bad rap. We often point to the blamer as the one who's really destructive, more than the person who simply shuts down and gets quiet. But purely relationally speaking, they are all equally relationally destructive.
Feedback is a gift. But what if you're a shamer and someone gives you negative feedback and you agree in your heart that that's probably not just, he's probably not just talking about my project, he's probably talking about me. I would think if you struggle with shame, it's hard to take feedback and separate that from who you are as a person.
Yeah, so I can speak personally to this one. So part of my pain cycle is when I encounter pain, I feel inadequate. So this was so strong when I first got married that even a neutral question from my husband, what are we having for dinner tonight? And I haven't prepared dinner, just sent me into this place of inadequacy. And that is such a small trigger. But because that was the wound, and I was probably already swimming in those waters that day. I was in graduate school at the time, so there's a good chance I was already in that place of inadequacy. And he happened to walk through the door and hit that. So yeah, it is hard to separate your personhood from your performance when you're in that place. But I would say that that's my responsibility to do that.
So as you're coaching leaders, because we bring all this to our meetings, we bring our personality to the table. I would think that step 1 is to try to get to the bottom of what your default mode is.
Yes, you cannot speak to what you have not named. So some people are kind of like, why does this matter? Can't we just move on in a healthy way? Just tell me what to do, not what not to do. But we get caught down the road because if I say to myself, I'm loved, but the wound that I'm carrying around is that I'm powerless or I'm helpless. I'm loved is absolutely true, but it's not going to speak to that feeling. So you cannot change what you have not named. And that helps put handles on what you specifically need to be taking responsibility for.
Is there a way that you've learned to help people discover what their default?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different, and this is an evolving process, but just something to think about this evening is as you think about the painful moments or relationships or circumstances in your story, what are the messages that you received about who you are and whether or not you're safe? So I know for me, I felt like if I wasn't perfect, I would be rejected. And so becoming perfect and doing the very best I can and giving it my all was my survival as a kid because I didn't want to let anybody down. And because it would mean that I would be rejected. So there's narratives that we're living out that we can think about what is the story I took away, or what is the message I took away from that moment.
How did you get through that? Like, how have you learned to cope with that? Because I would guess that a lot of people in the room here are in the positions they're in because they've worked really hard, but something drives that. Something drives that ambition. It's not always healthy.
Yeah.
So how do you get out of that cycle of I'm loved because of what I bring to the table, and learn to really accept yourself with all of your limitations and weaknesses?
It's a journey. But if you want to do something different, it starts with that root. So the coping behavior would be the weed. We don't do those things in a vacuum. All the blame, shame, control, escape, if you see yourself doing those things, I call that the tip of the iceberg. There's something below the waterline, and starting to ask yourself, what is it that I'm feeling about myself, or what is it that I'm feeling about the situation or relationship? And then in order to change that behavior, I wish self-control was enough. It's not. Obviously, the Holy Spirit is our helper in this change, but it's learning to take a posture toward yourself of, that's a message I heard, and I have really good reasons for feeling that way. What is it that I want to say to that kid? What have I decided is true about that little girl or little boy? And sometimes I have my clients literally carry around a picture or keep one on their phone of a picture of themselves at that age, because chances are they're talking to themselves in a way that they would not talk to that kid. And so whether it's helpful to picture yourself younger or look in the mirror, if you're able to do that and say, yeah, that was a message I heard a lot. Is that the message, now that I'm grown, that I want to continue to give that person in the mirror?
I want to tell a story about one time I felt led to confront a friend with some issues, and there were others in the room. And I had written down some things I wanted to say. Others had read those. So I felt like I came into the room prepared spiritually and emotionally. And I started to share with him behaviors that I had seen in his life that concerned me about his character and some things going on in his life. And I remember specifically he said, well, I'm just a terrible person. I guess I'm just a terrible person. And I remember feeling at that moment like this conversation's over, because we can't separate behavior from who he is as a person. It's hard for me to throw stones at him because I have done that too. Like when someone comes to me and maybe they just start loading on criticism, I come to the conclusion of, well, this is about me at my core, and they've found it out, and now I just have to run.
I'm a bad husband. I'm a bad dad. I'm
yeah.
a bad everything.
Right. I'm just a bad husband. Or, the situation of cooking. I think that's a great example. Like the pressure is real. Every night we're going to ask you, what are we eating for dinner?
And many times I've said, I don't know. What are you cooking? Like,
right.
What are you preparing?
So the cooking thing is real.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it does fall on you and our family. Me and the boys rely on you to do the cooking because you're really good at it. And
I related to what she said, because if I've had a busy day or haven't been able to think about it, then I do immediately feel shame. Like, well, I'm the mother to prepare these kids their food, and I don't have a plan for tonight.
And our question just made you heard, I'm a terrible mother and a terrible
Well, no, I hear,
wife.
What have you been doing all day?
Okay.
I'm not an extremist as much as you are, but like, what have you been doing all day? Like, have you not thought about this? Don't you know that dinner comes every night at the same time, and we're going to be expecting this? Like, did you not order your time better than to begin thinking through this morning?
That's incredible. So you hear me say, wildly inefficient woman.
Yes.
What are we eating?
Yes.
When all I said was, hey, what are we eating tonight? I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be good.
I know.
I just feel like what she's saying is true. Like, we have to be aware of the script that's playing in our mind. And I love the way she pointed that out.
Yeah. So someone in the room identified that she loves to read for an escape. Here's what Nicole said about that, as well as what other escape mechanisms can look like.
So that would be an example of the consequences not being the same as marijuana or alcohol, but emotionally it's serving that same purpose. It's hitting pause on your emotional processing instead of helping her process that through.
Wow. So in a way, it's lengthening the pain because she's not looking at it, dealing with it. She's getting lost in a book.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think reading is a bad thing to do when you're grieving, but if you've identified that this is, like, I think that was brilliant, the fantasy, noticing that it's not just any books, it's, I want to be someplace where the rules are different and where I don't have to think about what's happening.
What are some other more common escape that people tell you, like, here's my escape? Is it hobbies? Is it golf? Is it hunting? Is it?
Could be any of that. I think Netflix is huge now that we can binge watch things and there's always cliffhangers. And so it's easy to get lost in this story for 10 hours. Sleeping can be one. I had a client one time, this was like 12 years ago. He was talking about, as a dad of 3 girls, and he was just talking about this painful story. And then he got this far off look in his eyes and he said, well, I'm going to Arizona. Like literally just leaving a different state that night. So, I mean, it can look a whole host of ways.
Just anything that turns your brain off of the pain.
Yeah, or physically leaving.
I'm just going to Arizona.
Yeah, it was interesting.
I bet they didn't come back.
No, not the next week.
The person who withdraws in order to punish. How do you know you're doing that? Or how do you become aware? Because biblically, we're kind of encouraged to do that. You know, like gentle answer turns away wrath. So don't show them the vulnerability of my anger, but just put up a front that I'm okay, even though I'm really not. So how do you deal with that?
I would say that's quiet wrath. So I would say quiet wrath is equally destructive to loud wrath. The way that you ask yourself, am I doing that if I'm withdrawing? And remember, I said you can withdraw in all 4 of those categories. So the question I ask myself is, what am I looking for? Am I looking for the other person to be hurt? Am I looking for the other person to change? Am I looking to just get away? Am I looking to pout and sulk? That would be withdrawing in the shame quadrant. So the most helpful question is, what are you looking for when you're withdrawing? Because the face of it could look the same in all 4 of those.
So just doing some of that interior work to ask, the reason I'm behaving this way is because I really want X to happen.
Yeah.
Is there anybody here that responds with blame? When you experience pain, you tend to blame others. Nobody. Great. We never blame each other in this room. That's not the first one I go to either, right? Like, I know Adam and Eve, like, you know, there was blame early in the garden about whose responsibility it was. But when you see this in like say in a work environment,
it can look like fault finding. It can look like being really critical.
Okay.
It can look like those would be more controlled versions of blame.
So this wouldn't have happened if that person had done their job.
It's likely not going to look like that.
Oh, no, it looks like that. That's exactly what it sounds like.
But it could be, you know, a more controlled version of being really critical or, offloading the responsibility. Or
this conversation about healthy withdrawal or unhealthy withdrawal is complicated because I just shared this passage at a church this last Sunday that there were times when Jesus and the disciples were so busy that he said, let's come away to a remote place. There is a good reason to withdraw. And sometimes it means watching a movie or reading a novel or finding some constructive way to stop processing pain. Because it's a law of diminishing returns.
Or worry.
Yeah, after a while, it's like, there's nothing more for my mind to think about on this. I'm just going to keep turning it over in my head, and it's going to drive me insane. So I need to turn it off. So I think there's good ways to do that and bad ways. Personally, I tend to live in fantasy land because I have a really wild imagination, as you know. So I can get lost in some kind of creative thing, whether it's reading or writing or anything. And I can be like in my office for hours.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty obsessive.
I think it
and not
bothers-
in a bad. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's very extreme.
We've actually never had this conversation. How does it feel for you when I'm in my office, the door shut, like after hours, and I'm not working on work? Does it concern you, or are you like, oh, I'm so glad he's in there, like doing something fun?
I think used to it concerned me. Now I think it's good. I know that you need an outlet, and so I think it's the healthiest way for you to process emotions. If I were to interrupt you and say, come do something with me, I mean, within reason. Like you can't be in there for 4 or 5 hours every night. But if there's a night where you're just, something is really disturbing you and you just need to go in there and write, you've like painted some, like you talked about that one time, you're into poetry now. There's always something.
I really have gotten into poetry.
I know. I love it
This
because
is
I love
fun.
poetry. Which I can't even say the word. My kids
Oh my
laugh because I
gosh.
say poem and they're like, did you say poem?
I am convinced that you can't say you don't like poetry because that's like saying you don't like music. You just haven't found the right poems yet.
Because yours don't rhyme.
I know mine don't rhyme. I actually have written her several poems and they never rhyme, and it's really bothering her. It has to rhyme if it's a poem.
But beyond that, here's what I know about you. It's going to change rapidly. Like, you will not be in poetry in a couple of months.
Correct.
You will have moved on from that.
Correct.
And it's good for you.
Yeah, it's like an elective course at a college. I'm going to take this elective, and then next semester I'm going to do archery.
But I used to resent that. You're not going to do archery.
I'll do bowling.
No, you're not going to do anything active. It's all mind games.
Yeah, you're right.
So, but I can appreciate that about you at this point.
Really?
Yep.
Say that again.
I appreciate that about you.
What did you say you admired about me?
I don't know yet.
Those are two very different things.
Yes, I can say that.
Oh, that means a lot. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah. I don't even know where we were here.
Well, we're talking about healthy withdrawal. And I told you that sometimes I just need to go into my office and like do something creative, and it has absolutely no value. I'll probably throw it away.
So here's a perfect example. You were pretty upset about something last week, and it was nighttime. I love to take a bath at night. I take a pretty lengthy bath, and you actually left and went to Barnes & Noble. And I was watching your Life 360, and I thought you were going to the gym, and I was so proud. And then you turned right out of the neighborhood. I was like, well, he's going to Barnes & Noble.
I am under surveillance, people. I might as well put a little ankle thing around my ankle.
I just heard the door. I heard the door close and the car start, and I thought, well, that's weird. And then I was like, he's going to go blow off steam at the gym. And then you went right out of the neighborhood. So
That's so cool.
But
I'm proud of me for doing that.
But you came back better. You went like 2 hours. You went away for a couple of hours. You came back better. And so, like, I have in maturity realized, like, sometimes you just need to go to a Barnes & Noble and pick up all the beautiful covers because it really means a lot to you.
Yeah, and I sent you an apology because I know I can be a moody creative. And sometimes all I need, honestly, is just to get away from everything and everyone and turn it off, and then I'll come back a different person.
Okay, but I think the point of this, the best part that we could say here is that you can now admit that. Used to, you wouldn't admit that. And so it frustrated me that you wouldn't just embrace who you are.
Yeah.
And now you can come to me and say, I just feel moody. I need to go be around like aesthetics and beauty and that sort of stuff. And I'm like, great.
You know what greatly helped me with this? Angie's going to give me like a big high five for this. I listened to a podcast. Yep. A long time ago, I heard Andrew Peterson and Ian Cron talk about what it's like for them to be Enneagram 4s. Mm-hmm. And it set me free in so many ways because they put into words how I have felt about my mood swings, and I felt a lot of shame about it. And yet here are two guys who have worked through that in a healthier way. So podcasts matter. I hope that this helps somebody. I hope somebody out there feels like, I remember listening to this podcast with Ben and Lindley, and it helped me. Well, that was really fun. I'm so glad we pulled that material from that retreat because Nicole has so much wisdom, and she's interesting to talk to. Every time I'm with her, I'm like, will you just come counsel us? Mm-hmm. Can we just hire you to live at our house and counsel us every night?
Well, I like practical list. So I can think through, okay, blame, shame, control, or escape. What am I feeling at this moment?
Yeah, I'm excited because we struck a friendship up with Nicole. Angie, you're the one that introduced us to her book. And then we were just like, we got to get to know this lady. We have a Bible study coming out with her in spring, May 2025. It's called Daring Joy. And it's a lot of this material put into a Bible study form for people to work through. So Nicole Zasowski, thanks for coming on as a Lifeway author, and we can't wait for this to release. I hope this encourages you today. The Glass House is executive produced by Angie Elkins, edited and engineered by Donnie Gordon with help from Nathan Howard, show notes and production help from Nikki Ogden, photography by Emily Bergeron and Bailey Watley. Recorded at the Lifeway Podcast Studio in Brentwood, Tennessee.